Hello, I'm Mark, and this is the Fast Track Impact podcast for researchers who want to be more productive and achieve real-world impacts from their research. So this week I want to think about authenticity, and I'm asking the question, how authentic are you as a researcher? Now, I'm not trying to suggest that we're all putting out fake versions of ourselves, very far from it. But I want you to just have a think about the thing that you see on the surface when you Google your name, what you represent yourself as on your university profile, what you might infer from looking at your Google Scholar profile. Actually, is that set of skills and expertise the sum total of your identity as a researcher? Or is there something more? Is there something missing? And actually, where does the framing of ourselves come from? So, of course, behind my expertise is my personality, it's my values, it's my principles, it's my way of understanding what knowledge is and what constitutes valid knowledge and how I go about doing research. And if you're looking for a team member, then there are a bunch of things that I'm great at, and there are a bunch of limitations that you might have to work around. And actually, can I represent some of that stuff as well? And beyond the skills and the expertise, in addition to the values, the approaches, all of that stuff, actually, can I interrogate why it is that I chose those particular words to sum up my expertise? I mean, there are usually at least 10 different ways in which you can cut that pie and you can frame your expertise, the contribution that you can make to yourself. And actually, when you look at this and you interrogate yourself, very often you discover that you did this in relation to the current keywords, debates, words, phrases that have currency within your particular discipline. And of course, if you've done that, then actually you may instantly be limiting the people who are going to read that profile and have any form of resonance and relate to you and reach out to you because, well, okay, you don't do what I do. You're one of those people. You identify yourself as part of a tribe, effectively, by the way you choose to frame your expertise. And I'm not going to say there's anything necessarily deeply wrong with this, but I want you to interrogate those assumptions and ask yourself, actually, how deeply authentic is this? And is there something more that we should be representing of ourselves to the world? And might there be some benefits of being more deeply authentic about who we are and how we present ourselves as researchers? For myself, I attempted to fashion myself as a world expert on deserts and on peatlands at various points in my research career. And I've always felt a fairly high degree of imposter syndrome. And I think in those times of my life in particular, I really felt that sense. Of course, I don't know everything there is to know about deserts or peat bogs. Very, very far from that. And I think that for me, this was a process about understanding that if I stuck to the evidence and stuck to what I knew and what I could do, and I acknowledged the limitations of that, then, well, I can pretty much overcome imposter syndrome most of the time and achieve what I need. I know enough. But even when I had overcome imposter syndrome with these different ways of presenting myself, I still had a problem. I didn't really feel comfortable in my skin identifying as a peatland or a desert person. So I moved to an identity as a conservationist, which for me meant I was able to quite implicitly explain that, well, I am an interdisciplinarian. I am going to have to be able to look across disciplines and to be able to say anything of value to conservation. And as a discipline, it is inherently values-based. And impact-focused. If I do some research which actually has a negative impact on the environment or that nothing comes from, then I've kind of failed, really, as an applied researcher. And so what I'm trying to illustrate here is how you can just when you start to think about how you frame your expertise, you can think, yeah, there are different ways of doing this, and actually there are very different issues that arise when you start to reframe who you are. So instantly, I realized that, you know what, I framed my expertise the way I did because there were a bunch of people in disciplines who I respected, who I wanted to appeal to as an expert in peatland research or in desert research. And instantly, now I had reframed my expertise, I realized I felt quite embarrassed, especially in these particular groups of experts who knew everything about these particular environments. Because actually there is this huge bias in the academy that we all respect the experts in our field. These are the heroes at the top of our disciplines, and they have very narrow expertise typically, but these are the people we respect, and we assume, well, I have to be like that. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that, but for me, that was never going to fit. And so for me, it was about overcoming the fact that I feel quite embarrassed by not being an expert in anything. And to start with, I actually made excuses for myself. And I used to say, well, look, yeah, I'm a jack of all trades, I'm a master of none, but that's just who I am. And for me, becoming more comfortable in my skin as an impact-focused interdisciplinarian was about saying, well, you know what? This might be how you would perceive an impact-focused interdisciplinarian as not having any expertise, not being a proper researcher, whatever. I'm not allowing that to colour my perception of myself, and I'm going to frame this to you as exactly what all teams need, exactly what this discipline needs is someone who can make the connections to those other disciplines, someone who can spot the opportunities to make this relevant for new audiences and to achieve change based on that research. And for me, this was about recognizing the values that had driven that change in persona. And so for me, the values that were driving my framing of myself as an expert in deserts or peat bogs was a set of values around people pleasing, that I want to be respected, I want to be liked, I want people to think that I'm amazing at something, my ego needs this. And realizing that actually a much more powerful set of motivators were these much more values-based motivators around making a difference and being able to make a difference at scale. And in doing so, the means to that end was seeing between the disciplines and joining the dots and seeing the big picture. I think that for me then, authenticity is about understanding your contribution, but doing so in a way that really deeply respects who you are as a person and values the whole of your contribution, not just the contribution you think that everyone in your peer group or the heroes of your discipline would like to see, and to value all of that and become more at home and more confident in your identity as a researcher. In this episode, I want to think about authenticity in a fairly structured way. So I have a definition for you. It's not my own definition, but I'll give you my take on this as a definition. And I want to work through this. I'm going to do this through the lens of our professional lives, and I'm going to do it also with a few personal anecdotes, because for me, actually, part of my authenticity as a researcher is that I am an integrated person. I am a person who has values, who has opinions, who has feelings, and that actually informs what I do and how I do it. And actually, you need to understand some of that, not all of my personal details, but some of that stuff if you want to understand who I am as a researcher and what it's going to be like working with me. And I think that as we get clearer on our professional identities, that can also then have an impact on how we see ourselves in our personal lives as well, because these two are intimately connected. So here's my definition. And I'm going to break this down into 5 components. So this is based on the work of academic psychologist Brené Brown. I forget which university she comes from, somewhere in the US. She's written a few popular books, so if you Google her name, you'll at least find her popular books, Brené Brown. And her definition of authenticity has these 5 components. So component number 1 is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we should be and embracing who we are. And so clearly implicit in this is that interrogation of the assumptions behind how we framed who we are, how we understand who we are, to find out, is this genuinely all from within me, or is it coming from elsewhere, and how much of this is people-pleasing? Secondly, once we have let go of who we are, and let's remember this is a daily process, but once we've begun to regularly let go of who we think we ought to be and embrace who we in fact are, there is a problem. And that problem is that actually the things that we genuinely feel represent us are often things that we feel make us vulnerable. And that's why we've never put this out to the world. And we realize that actually part of the process of working out who we ought to be and who the world thinks we should be is a process of defending ourselves. And okay, so this might be who I genuinely am, but actually on some subconscious level, I'm hiding that because I know that if people discover that about me, that I'm open to critique. I'm open to people calling me out on these limitations. No one's going to want to work with me if they realize these parts of who I am. Very much that idea of jack of all trades, master of none for me. And actually realizing that, being authentic means being vulnerable. And understanding that vulnerability, owning that vulnerability, and thinking about now how I can integrate the different parts of myself and put out a self which is authentic, which recognizes that vulnerability in a way which is safe. And we'll think about this in some more depth in a minute. That means that we need courage, and that's the third component of her definition. If we can daily let go of who we think we ought to be and embrace who we are in all of its vulnerability, then we need to have the courage to be imperfect. And I think for many researchers, this is a huge challenge. Perfectionism is a problem across the board in any profession, and it has its roots deep in our psychology. But there are a very strong set of normative rules that tell us as researchers, you have no choice but to be perfect, because if you're wrong, if those numbers aren't quite right, and if this is only approximate, you know what? That policy might be wrong. People might die, and that's all going to be on your head. And so there's this really powerful set of norms that says we have to be perfect, and we cannot put anything out into the world that is not 100% perfect. And of course, if we have an authentic identity as a researcher that includes aspects of us that have limitations and that are vulnerable, then actually built into my new identity as a researcher are those imperfections. And that takes courage. I need to think about how actually I can frame these imperfections in ways that do not undermine my credibility, the authority that I might have in certain arenas where I need to have power and influence if I'm going to actually make a difference and change the world. But at the same time, that imperfection, when framed appropriately, can in fact be the power to make people realize, you know what? I'm a real person. I don't always get everything right. I have limitations and I accept those limitations. And actually now there is the room for two-way conversation. There is the room for learning. There is that humility there built in. The fourth element of our definition is cultivating compassion. And for me, that is primarily compassion to myself, but that then flows from self-compassion to compassion for others as part of an authenticity that will be fundamentally empathic in nature, a theme that you might have noticed running through this podcast. And for me, that is essential because actually what drives us to perfectionism is a lack of self-compassion. I beat myself up for every tiny mistake that I make, and I become increasingly cautious and frightened because of the shame I will heap on my own head, let alone the shame that will come to me from everyone else if I mess up, if this is any less than perfect. And so for me, that self-compassion is what gives me the permission to not always be perfect. And then finally, setting boundaries. And for me, boundary setting is part of compassion. That actually, self-compassion requires me to set a set of boundaries around myself that says, okay, this is who I am in that full, beautiful, complex reality that is me, which includes my limitations, my vulnerabilities. But I'm doing this in ways which are safe, that have boundaries, that mean that I'm not going to inherently be hurt by this process, that enables me to be authentic without constantly having to erect barriers, put on armor, stick out spines and become bristly, that enables this to be an identity that opens channels of empathy and that people can relate to, and that initiates collaborations, discussions, and relationships. So, authenticity, the daily practice of letting go of who we think we should be, embracing who we are in all its vulnerability, with the courage to be imperfect, cultivating compassion, and setting boundaries. The first of these 5 things, then, let's unpack what this is about and think through some examples that will get you to start really thinking for yourself about what in your world letting go of who you should be and embracing who you are might look like. First of all, I think it's important to contrast the ideas that we have at the moment with what we might feel might be more authentic or deeper or fuller as a representation of ourselves. So have a look, do a Google search of yourself, do it within a Google incognito search so you get what the world sees rather than what Google will put in front of you if you Google yourself on a regular basis. So find out what that is. What does that look like? What is that persona, that identity, that brand perhaps that might be out there about you? Piece that together from the various different fractured parts of yourself that you find in that Google search. And what is that? What does that look like? Is that one narrow part of yourself? Is that a whole load of very different parts which are highly fractured and don't really add up and make any sense? Is it biased towards one part of yourself? And how fully authentic is this? And in particular, have a look at the elements of yourself that you feel are important to you, that make you who you are, that are vulnerable. The parts of yourself that you're perhaps less proud of, but that are actually important if people are going to be able to work well with you, that people find out very quickly about you when they work with you, and that you can, of course, frame in more positive ways. And it's not about making everything positive. I have weaknesses, I have failings, I'm not perfect. But let's think about this in relation. And what you'll instantly find, I think, is that there is at least some level of disconnect. We don't present our full selves. And of course, for good reason. I don't want to air my dirty laundry. I don't want to put out all of my personal secrets and failings in order to attract critique and create problems for myself. But have a look at this and just ask yourself, well, are there elements here that I may want to build in? And when you start to think about which elements of yourself that you're not currently putting out there that are actually important to you and make you vulnerable, it becomes possible to start curating an identity that you feel more comfortable signing up to and that will reduce the likelihood of imposter syndrome. For me, the key cause of imposter syndrome is that we have a set of expectations out there in the world that do not match how we feel about ourselves. And you feel that there's a mismatch. The world expects this of me, and when they get me, they discover this imperfect reality. And actually, the more we can align that imperfect reality in ways which are safe and are as far as possible positive, I think then the less we are eaten up by imposter syndrome and the more confidently we actually put ourselves out there as not overselling ourselves, but authentically saying, yeah, this is me. If I give you a couple of examples here, I think for me, an example of that jack of all trades, master of none weakness that is me as an impact-focused interdisciplinarian, and this is a big weakness. I mean, a lot of people are really nervous about putting that kind of identity out there because surely that undermines my expertise. People only listen to me because I am an expert, the expert, perhaps. And if I put out there that actually, you know what, I'm a generalist. I work across, I work between. Doesn't that fundamentally undermine my position, my credibility, my authority? Well, maybe, depending on the kind of research you do in the position you want to have and how you view what knowledge is. In my case, the most recent example of this is a project I'm leading. This is a flagship project for my funder. It's the largest grant from that funder for my department in its history. It's a £1.5 million project called Resilient Dairy Landscapes, and I am the principal investigator. One minor flaw, it's about dairy systems, and I know nothing about dairy. Well, not nothing, but very little. In fact, remarkably little. And instantly, in the first month of our project, the flaws in my understanding of this issue or this area were very quickly exposed when I put together a project flyer and put a picture of a cow on the front. And my project team told me, Mark, you do realise that you put a picture of a bull on the front of that leaflet, don't you? Ah, really? And you do realise, Mark, that milk comes from cows? Okay, lesson learned, and luckily no farmers or policymakers or anyone else saw this picture. My team caught this. And of course, for me, there was an instant, oh my goodness, moment of what on earth am I doing? How on earth do I think I can lead a project like this about dairy? And I don't even know how to distinguish between cows and bulls. Others, I mean, you think this is quite easy, but apparently not. So it was a huge confidence knock for me, thinking, oh my goodness, can I do this? Is this going to be just really embarrassing? And very quickly, I went back to my own values, to actually why I decided to do this project in the first place, and remembered that, yeah, I didn't take this on because I want to become a world expert in dairy. I took this on because it was an interesting context, an interesting lens through which to look at some much bigger, much more important issues that resonate at an international scale across different sectors, environments, contexts. And for me, it's about my expertise as an interdisciplinarian who is impact-focused that then enables me to generate insights of far greater academic significance and originality than someone who was only focused on dairy could do, that would have far greater real-world significance, and the ability that I have then to open doors in terms of impact that mean that actually I'm in a unique position. I am well qualified to be principal investigator of this project, even if I do need a few lessons from my children on where milk comes from. I think then taking this more personally, society gives us a lot of things. So I'm asking you to interrogate where you're framing, how you chose those three words to sum up yourself on your CV when someone tells you. Where did they come from in terms of your peer group, the people in your discipline who create the norms and the assumptions that you've taken unquestioningly and you've used now to frame what you do that puts you as in their group and, of course, then excludes you from other debates, from other groups. And that may be our discipline. It may be broader than that. And actually, I think that there are many parts of our identities that are given to us unthinkingly, unquestioningly, perhaps, by society that we can interrogate usefully. So, for me, as a man, I struggle a lot with the fact that I'm not an emasculine man. I'm a very feminine man in a lot of ways. And society, certainly in the part of the world that I live in, tells me that somehow that's not good enough, that my children will innately be losing out. My dream car sitting outside my house at present is a new Beetle. To my horror, when I discovered that the new edition of the Beetle didn't have a pot for a vase for a flower, I made my own vase, and there is proudly sitting on that dashboard a big white flower. My flower power car is my dream car, and apparently they did that because it wasn't appealing to men. Men didn't like the fact that there was a flower in the car, and clearly, yeah, I'm not the man that they're trying to appeal to. I'm learning with my kids to appreciate watching rugby and football, but it does not come naturally. And my wife does all of DIY because we have had so many disasters that there's just no point in me even attempting to do this stuff. And for me, it's about then saying, well, okay, rather than allowing that to eat away on my subconscious, and it does, it's not something, as an academic, clearly, I don't believe in these stereotypes. I actually, on my conscious mind, I want to fight against those kind of stereotypes, especially with my children. But you know what? It can eat away at your confidence just slowly and subtly in the background. And so I'm trying to, on purpose, reframe my contribution to society, to my family, as a more feminine man. That actually I make my living from my brain power, not from the cleverness of my hands and my practical abilities. And that is okay. That's good. And that means that I'm a thoughtful husband and father that provokes interesting conversation, that gets my kids to think more critically than perhaps they might otherwise do. I do cooking with my son, so he will hopefully be a better cook when he leaves home than I did with the stereotypical things I was told I should do when I was growing up. I do stamp collecting with one of my daughters. I do music with one of my other daughters. These are gifts, and they are valuable gifts, and things that we can treasure that are not masculine, but are still just as valuable as teaching them how to fix a car or play sport or whatever else. I think my most recent failing in this, which just goes to show you how deeply this stuff kind of gets ingrained and how unquestionably we do this, was I got invited to a party. So my wife was invited to a reading group thing. All the mums in the local area kind of got together. And so the dads decided that they would have their own party. And instantly it provoked all of these anxieties in me. So I don't get out that much. Let's just be honest here. Or at least I do, but with fairly unique people like me, not with normal people. And instantly I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is going to be challenging. So I took some advice for some friends, and they instantly told me, don't take a bottle of red wine. You need to go with a 4-pack of beers. Whether you drink them or not is irrelevant. The wine is bad, beer is good. Okay, so I'm just going straight into all these stereotypes and like, right, I'm going to try and fit in with these guys and be accepted and not embarrass myself. And I got there, and everyone's chatting about DIY and the latest kind of raw plug that is somehow magical, and how we live in an agricultural community, so various ways of fixing tractors and things like that. And I'm sitting there wondering how to even come into this. And then it moves to sport, and I'm even more lost. And at a certain point, someone starts moaning about their kids, and I'm like, kids, I've got kids, we're all dads. Great. A point of connection here. And so I figured, why don't we, maybe share some ideas of cool places you can take your kids at the weekend? And I asked the question, made some suggestions, and it kind of fell silent. And it was quite clear that swapping ideas about cool places to go with your kids was not the point of the conversation. The point of the conversation was to moan about your kids. So I'm back to square one again. And that was it. I mean, nothing. And by the end of the conversation, it was a little bit awkward. We're a few hours in, and one of these guys turns to me and says, Mark, you've not really said much. So he tries to, I can see him, he's taking pity on me, the poor guy. So I see you kind of live up in this house next to the forest. What's it like living so close to the forest? And this was my opportunity. And oh my goodness, I blew it so badly. And I was like, just last weekend, you should, you need to go. All right, so if you go up around this corner and over this little hill, you know where the such and such is, on the left, there's this massive patch of wild raspberries. I went with the kids last weekend. We collected enough wild raspberries to make 5 jars of jam. And it is just the most amazing wild raspberry jam that you've ever tasted. And I could see these guys' faces, and there was this complete silence. And I was like, shit, that was not what I was meant to have said. And the conversation moved on. Soon after that, I made my excuses, and I was the first person to leave the party. And the parting shot was, so we'll see you at the farmer's market with your jam stall then, Mark. Yeah, see you. It was fairly excruciating. My attempt to fit in fell fairly badly flat because I'm just not that kind of guy. And of course, I'm walking back up the road to my house with all of these insecurities and complexes running around my head and thinking to myself, Mark, why did you try and do that? Why did you try and fit in and be someone that you're not? And you know what? If those guys want you to be someone and want to take the mick out of you for not being like them, then hey, so be it. I'm bigger than that, and that should not actually bother me. But I think what I'm asking you to think about here is actually, where do these identities come from? Who gives them to you? How unquestioningly do we have elements of our identity, both in our personal and our professional lives, that we've not really thought about? And actually, might we feel a bit more comfortable in our skins, a bit less likely to experience imposter syndrome, if we could actually have a more holistic and complete understanding of who we are and put that out to the world? Now, as I said earlier, there is, of course, a problem. I've now hopefully begun to let go of who the world, my colleagues, want me to be. And now I'm embracing who I actually am. And of course, who I actually am involves vulnerabilities, because that may not be exactly what the world wants, what my colleagues want of me. And there is that point of difference that is, by definition, that vulnerability. And of course, the question comes, well, what if nobody likes that part of me? What if everyone prefers the perfect me, the shiny version of myself that I pitched to fit in with them much more, and they now are not interested in collaborating with me? They feel a bit embarrassed by me. They fall away. Well, for me, the first thing is, well, you know what? Great. Actually, I'd far rather work with collaborators who value me for what I actually am and what I genuinely have to offer at that deeper level. And I will start to develop new collaborations at that deep level, where I feel way more relaxed, way more confident, way more able to contribute than I did in that version of myself that was designed to fit in. And of course, others may start shaming you for those parts of yourself that don't fit in. And so for me, this is a journey that requires us to be fairly resilient and to think in advance about how we're going to deal with that. So for me, I do a lot of work with social scientists, and I find that social scientists are more likely to do this than anyone else, but it does go across the board. And for me, the most regular shaming experience that I experience from my colleagues around my interdisciplinarity is name dropping. And so there's a conversation that happens, and they are now name dropping all of these isms and names of key authors in the field. And of course, according to such and such, there is this theory that says so and so. And if we just take a such and such Aryan approach, then of course we all know what that means. Then this is how we can solve the problem. And I'm sitting there going, a what approach? But who? What is this person? And the way in which it's framed is just so obviously we would all know who this person is, that I don't dare say, who is that person? What was their theory? What are you talking about? And what I've learned over the years is just to get enough confidence, and it did take me some time, I will confess. As an early career academic, I found this very hard. But now as a professor, I find it much easier to say, actually, who? What are you talking about? And I can see this kind of sigh of relief around the table, because nobody else knew what they were talking about either. And they are then forced to explain exactly what it is. And at that point, the shaming, actually, this was implicit to start with, now it becomes explicit, because they're now saying to me, the founder of our discipline, Sir such and such, OBE, whatever it is, the dude, the person that we all know about, pregnant pause. No, never heard of them. Tell me more. And doing that in a way that for me is not embarrassed, that says, well, hey, if I haven't heard of them, there's a good chance someone else hasn't heard of them. I'm sorry that you think that because I publish in your field that I should have known about that and that you now think less of me, but tell me more and maybe we can actually have a conversation that we can all join in with that doesn't now make you look like you're cleverer than everyone else and make everyone else feel inadequate. For me, the story I told you about with see you at the farmer's market comment, that was the ultimate capping on the shame that I experienced in my party from hell. And for me, owning the feminine parts of myself and saying, this is who I am, and valuing that means that I have to be able to say, you know what, I'm not coming with my 4-pack and my rehearsed topics of conversations. I'm coming as I am, and if that means I sit back and listen to everyone else and don't say anything, then so be it. I'll sit and enjoy my wine in the corner, and that's fine. I think that there are often two responses that we have, though, in that moment, and I think it's worth calling them to consciousness, because in that moment where we've decided that I'm going to be authentic, and instantly I'm put in myself, I'm put in my place, and I'm shamed in some way, we either shrink or we puff up. And I think that neither of those are healthy responses. And let's just be honest, it's going to happen. And I think that in that personal situation with me, I shrunk into that corner. I felt acutely embarrassed in front of the other dads in that party, and disowned parts of myself that was deeply inauthentic. That actually, for me, as I've looked back on that, it is that shrinking back from and that disowning of myself that I feel most ashamed of. And I've forgiven myself. I don't feel ashamed now. But for me, actually, when you feel something like that, you need to interrogate why it makes you feel like that. So shrinking back is a regressive step. It's often quite damaging, and you typically shrink back to that position that is the people-pleasing version of yourself that everyone wants. But of course, there is an alternative, which is that, well, you know what, you've made me feel inadequate by name-dropping this person and telling me that I should know them because they founded our discipline. So I'm now going to put you in your place by explaining why I am the world expert in something else, and why actually I don't think they are the founder of the discipline, and something else is far more important, and why in some way I start nitpicking at that person. I'm undermining them. I've puffed myself up, and actually as a defense to my ego has been bruised by that shaming comment, and now rather than dealing with that bruised ego in a healthy way, I've puffed up to defend myself, and I'm hitting back, and we've now got a really dysfunctional meeting happening. I think that if you're trying so I think you need to stand your ground. Ultimately, this is a journey, and we will falter. We're not always going to get this right. And give yourself some compassion, which is what we're coming on to. Give yourself some compassion. You will shrink back sometimes. You will puff up sometimes. This isn't always going to work, but we need to try and stand our ground. Because authenticity is not about being liked. That means you may be disliked for being authentic. And actually, if you can have the courage to be authentic, that courage can be contagious. And you can discover that actually now other people sitting around that table have the courage to start asking questions as well, that actually for the very first time enable them to contribute to this project because they can understand the jargon, because they ask someone to unpack it, and you give people permission to be themselves. If you're trying to be liked, then criticism is, I would argue, more likely to be shaming. But if you're trying to be authentic and you're committed to that cause, then yeah, it's going to hurt. But I would argue that it is much less likely to lead to lasting or deep or damaging shame. The third of these elements now is about being fully yourself. The third of these is about having the courage to be imperfect. And being fully yourself is, for me, what gives us that courage. So this is a courage now that comes from within. This is not the courage that you get by fitting in. And there is a kind of false courage, I believe, that comes from saying, you know what, I stand with my discipline. I stand with the jargon of all of these people who created this in crowd, and I am now in that in crowd, and I have this false sense of confidence that whatever I say, because I reinforce all of those norms and assumptions from my in group will stand behind me. They will protect my interests, and there is this sense of confidence that you have, but it's a thin confidence because you're not entirely sure how much you believe it. You're not entirely sure how you deal with the critiques that come that undermine the consensus of your discipline. And what we're looking for here is a kind of courage that actually comes from within when you take a committed approach to authenticity. I'm going to suggest that this is fairly challenging, and for me, one of the reasons that why this is so challenging is that if I am fused in my identity with my work, which I think many of us are, especially the more workaholic tendencies we have. Very often the same psychology that drives us to workaholism drives us to increasingly fuse our personal identity, our sense of self, with our identity as a researcher, as our work identity. Then when something goes wrong professionally, when I have that shaming experience, then it's not just that I got that wrong. It's not just that I felt humiliated in front of my peers, and that was an experience that happened to me in work today, and I go home and put it behind me. Actually, this is now a fundamentally shaming experience on that level of who I am. Because if I am my work and I am fused in my identity with my work, that comment actually was about me. That experience of shame, that sense of inadequacy, is about me. That mistake is me. I am that mistake. It's not that I just made a mistake. And if I fully understand myself in all of my fullness and complexity, and I value my strengths and vulnerabilities, then I can accept the inevitability of mistakes without them threatening my self-identity and my self-worth. So there are these two ways that this can go. I need courage if I am to accept that, you know what, I'm not perfect, I'm going to make mistakes. If I am going to value myself in my full complexity, which includes vulnerabilities. And for me, the first step in being able to do that is to identify the extent to which I am fused in my identity with my work so that I can defuse that, separate that, so that I am more resilient when I make mistakes, and I'm more able to actually accept, yeah, I messed up at work today. That doesn't mean I'm completely wrong as a person. Doesn't mean that I am a mistake. It doesn't mean that I need to feel ashamed. I made a mistake. I feel bad about this. I'm going to do what I can to rectify that. And I retain that sense of self-identity and worth. And in fact, the fact that I have admitted to my mistake and I've now apologized, I've gone back, I've sorted out the issue, that plays into that authentic self that I am. That plays into that part of myself that says, yeah, I'm not perfect, but I make amends. I don't know everything, but when I make a mistake, I correct things. When I don't know the answer, I go and I find it out, and I'm still useful. A recent example for me was a training that I did, and this has never happened to me before, but I flunked it. I completely bottomed out on this training. So this is one of the things I enjoy most, and I think I'm pretty good at it. I get, on average, between 95% and 100% positive feedback from the trainings that I do, wherever I am, with whatever group. But this day things went wrong. So I discovered that a very close family member was ill, probably terminally ill, and it was devastating news for me. and I went then to Wales to go and say my goodbyes to this family member. That involved cancelling a whole load of stuff, and involved me cancelling one training, I think, and a bunch of other meetings and events. So I did that. I put myself first. I put my family first. I was authentic to my values, and I went and I said my goodbyes. As a process, that was really cathartic for me. It was hard. It was challenging, but I felt like, yeah, I've done what I needed to do. I feel okay. And the next day was another training. And the question was, well, do I just sit around? I can't get back home because of the way my travel's booked and just do nothing for a day. Or do I train? And I feel okay. I feel good. I feel like I've done what I need to do. Let's not just drag this out. Let's just go and do the training. Bad mistake. We all make them. It turned out that I was still processing stuff on a subconscious level. And I was distracted. I messed up my timings. I misidentified my audience. I started to trail off. I forgot what people asked me with questions and answered different questions. I mean, it was a mess. And I went to the training organizer in the break, and she was incredibly compassionate. And I explained what was going on. I apologized. I said I was going to pull myself together. And she said, look, Mark, I've seen you do training before. This is not what you normally do. This is not doing you any justice or us any justice. Go and take the rest of the day off, get yourself better, reorganize this training. And so I said, okay, well, we'll finish the session after the break, and then I'll cut loose and we'll reorganize the afternoon for another day. And I had to explain in very brief terms what was going on to the audience, and cancel the rest of the training. I've never actually been asked to stop a training because I was so bad. And I mean, that's my bad friend. That's my shame kind of self saying, you know what, you were that bad. You were asked to stop training. I mean, it doesn't ever get any worse than that. And I went out with that absolutely filled with shame. I can't believe that I just did that. What an idiot. I was angry with myself. I was embarrassed. It was really excruciating. But by the end of that day, I'd taken those feelings, I'd analysed, well, look, where does that come from? And yeah, I would like those people to have liked me, to have liked what I'd done, to have, for that not to have happened. But ultimately, I have a set of values which is about valuing myself and my family. I thought I put them first. It turned out I hadn't. There were various cues that I probably could have seen that I can see now with hindsight. I'm not going to do this again. I learned from this. And actually, I enact those values by, rearranging an entire full day of training free of charge, extra books. I make up for this stuff, and I do it again properly. And I don't feel ashamed about this. I don't feel embarrassed about this. I made a mistake. I'm making up for that mistake, and I'm doing what I do best, based on my values. So we make mistakes. We need the courage to say, you know what, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to make mistakes. And when I make those mistakes, I don't default into my old people-pleasing identity. I retain the courage of my convictions, and I retain authenticity. The fourth of my 5 elements now is cultivating compassion. And for me, this is primarily about self-compassion, but that then from that then flows compassion for others. And so for me, this was about having compassion on myself. In that last example, to take the time off work, to not beat myself up for the mistake that I'd made by going back to work too early. And I think this is something that a lot of us are not good at. You look at how much compassion you give your team members, your family members, others around you when they're ill, when they mess up, when they make mistakes. Do you give yourself that same level of compassion? And I think there are very few of us who actually do. And I think that that for me is an essential lesson if we are able to be authentically and fully ourselves and to have the courage to be imperfect. And so this is now, for me, about a series of processes, actions, behaviors, things that I do that enable me to cultivate my empathy skills, so that I cultivate compassion towards myself and towards my teams. In the productive researcher, I talked about the many story approach, which is a method that I use to identify unhelpful stories I tell about myself, to catch those stories and to then retell those stories in more evidence-based and empowering way. So I'm not hiding from the truth if I've done something bad, but I'm looking at my strengths, the success stories, I'm building on them, and I'm identifying those positive stories and telling them to myself on purpose. I then extend that then to try to be more compassionate with the people around me. So, for example, for me, when the Brexit vote happened, that for me on a personal level was a bereavement. I went through the phases of grief as I grieved the imminent loss of a part of my identity that I never actually realised was important to me before, that I am a European. And for me, as part of that process, rather than just going out and attacking Brexiteers, this was about identifying those people, finding out who they are, and asking them, why did you vote how you voted? And I sought people out in my local community, in my church, in taxi drivers turned out to be a very rich theme of Leave supporters. And I just asked why. And really why, and I went deep without presenting my own views, without trying to change anyone's opinion, just to understand and put myself in their shoes and say, right, I still don't agree with this, but I can see where these people were coming from, and now I can move over that anger phase in my grief and begin to accept what it seems is going to happen. I've got a conflict ongoing with a colleague at my work at the moment, and one of the things I've been doing as part of that conflict is to try as often as I can to meditate on that colleague and to imagine that colleague as happy as I can possibly imagine them. So it's a visualization technique, and I start with this spark of light and allow it to grow from the center of me outwards, and in the center of that light, I then put this image of this person, and I just imagine that person as happy as they could possibly be, and I wish happiness on this person. And in so doing, take away the thoughts of, I don't like this person, or I feel angry, or I feel injustice, or whatever it is, so that when I meet this person day to day, I can be entirely professional and beyond professional, kind, supportive, compassionate, despite the conflict that is ongoing between us. The final element now is balancing compassion with boundaries, and you can see where this is going already with this. These all build one on the other. And for me, if I have self-compassion, then that is what enables me now to draw the line when I need to draw that line to protect myself. And this is not about airing my dirty washing, telling people all of my failings, every mistake that I've made, and oversharing with people in order to be fully authentic and put all my vulnerabilities out there. This is about identifying myself in the fullness of who I am and presenting that in as positive a way as I possibly can that does not make me innately vulnerable and invite. Sorry, it does make me innately vulnerable. It doesn't invite criticism. It doesn't make me innately at risk or of attack. I'm not inviting that in the way that I'm doing this. But now what I'm doing is I'm drawing lines around myself that says, okay, so this is who I am, and there are certain things that I won't share. There are certain places that I won't go. And so on social media, I've just kind of done that on my podcast. So I hope not too many people listen to this. But on social media, I will not tell people how I voted in the referendum because I don't want to undermine my credibility as someone who does research that is relevant to Brexit. And there are some very clear lines about what I will and won't talk about and what I will and won't disclose in terms of things that I think are just not helpful to others, and vulnerabilities that could be exploited by people to undermine evidence that my vote has no bearing on whatsoever. So I am doing this in terms of my personal life and in terms of my ethics and the boundaries I draw with colleagues. So you'll have heard a few weeks ago I talked about workplace bullying and 4 resilience strategies that you can use to become more able to cope with the cut and thrust of academic life, which very often verges on intimidation and very often leaves us feeling demeaned. And there are things that we can do, but for me, at a certain point, a line is crossed, and if it is necessary, I will then take that to a formal bullying procedure. And you need to know what that line is and at what point this has gone beyond resilience strategies and making yourself safe and making your team safe informally to something which is much more concrete as a boundary. I think that for many of us, going with the flow rather than creating conflict is very attractive. And I think it's worth just being aware that being authentic will require boundaries at a certain point. And if you are fully authentic and committed to always go with the flow and never having any conflict, then being yourself when yourself is not exactly what everyone else wants, not what everyone likes, will involve people trying to change you, trying to make you back into that person that is convenient for them. And that will require you to draw boundaries, and that will inevitably lead to conflict in some cases. So create those boundaries to protect your own self-esteem so that more and more can bounce off you, so that you become more and more strong and resilient in the face of those who would try and push you back into shrinking into that version of yourself that they want to see. And as I exercise those boundaries and I draw those boundaries more certainly, I build an inner confidence to believe in myself and to continue to be that imperfect, vulnerable, whole person that I really am, rather than putting on a hard exterior and bristling up constantly to protect myself. The journey towards authenticity is something for me that is a wholehearted journey that is not only about our professional selves, but is something that has to be done on a personal level as well. So I think as you think about what you can do from what I've told you in today's podcast, think about this in both parts of your life and think about how those parts of your life connect and how you can be more authentic as a researcher, representing who you are in your personal capacity in ways which are still professional, but that channel the fullest parts of yourself, and vice versa, those parts of yourself that you express in your work that actually might bring some clarity and some goodness to your personal relationships that is not there at the moment. We are integrated people. And as we become more authentic in our work, we can grow more in our personal lives. So take a long, hard look at what you have put out into the world, what the world sees when they Google you, and ask yourself, how authentic is that? How deeply authentic is that compared to what you look at and see when you look inside yourself? And ask yourself whether you can start practicing a deeper form of authenticity on a daily basis, daily letting go of who we think we should be and embracing who we are, rejoicing in the vulnerability that inherently means we have to accept, but having the courage to embrace that in all of its imperfection, and cultivating the compassion for ourselves that we need to be able to embrace that imperfection, whilst cultivating daily practices that enable us to cultivate compassion for those around us, and keeping ourselves safe, setting the boundaries that we need to be genuinely authentic and yet safe at the same time.